In this episode of the Photography News podcast, Roger has a brush with fame, Will hunts bugs, and Kingsley proves he's not mad. Eventually. Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Photography News podcast. My name is Roger Payne. I'm the editorial director at Photography News, and I'm joined by two members of the team, two increasingly hirsute members of the team, as we are now well into this lockdown and nobody can go out and have any haircuts done. But let me start by introducing a man who actually probably doesn't really need any introduction. He's the editor of Photography News, and here's Mr. Will Cheung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley. How are we doing? All right?
We're both very good.
And can I say, my hair is a mess, but I don't need to worry about my beard because I hardly got any follicles on my face. But my hair's a mess, I'm afraid.
No problem. Good to have you here. With the other person is a man who does need some introduction. And that is none other than Mr. Kingsley Singleton, contributing editor. How are you, Kingsley?
Hello, it's nice to be back. Not that I've been anywhere. I've just been waiting here for you to go for 2 weeks.
Right. So let's start with what we've been shooting, because despite the fact that it is lockdown, we still believe that there's plenty to shoot. So Kingsley, why don't you start by telling us what you've been out and about shooting?
Well, I suppose it's actually split into two things. Last time out, we spoke about what we were going to do, and I retrieved some toys from the loft and kind of made a still life out of those. So that was quite fun, and took up a bit of time. And I also escaped briefly to the local park to shoot some of the cherry blossom because it's really local. I didn't feel under any kind of particular, like I was transgressing any particular rules by going out there. And I'm glad I did, because about 2 days afterwards, the wind came in and blew all the cherry blossom away. So it would have been an opportunity missed. But it was a sort of a slightly fraught feeling. Like there were obviously people moving through the park, and I was sort of thinking, like, am I going to get dobbed into the Rozzers for kind of being out with my camera? But I didn't take a tripod because I thought, that would be pushing things a bit too far, like putting down a beach towel or something. And I just shot with kind of, fairly fast lenses and did everything handheld. And
the results, you're pleased with the results?
I thought they were okay. I put them on Instagram and didn't lose any followers this time out. Although that sort of reminded me of, there's something that I'm trying to get used to with Instagram, which is that I do a lot of my pictures in vertical framing, which is probably just some sort of tick, that I've got. But coming from a Nikon SLR, that's in 3:2, and Instagram won't accept that upright as a 3:2. So everything I shoot, I then have to crop back to like a 5:4 to upload it. Anyway, that's just a little moan. If you're listening, Instagram, sort it out.
I'm sure they'll be on it straight away, Kingsley. I'm sure they're hanging on every word. So Will, have you been out shooting cherry blossom, or have you been doing stuff closer to home?
Well, I have been out, and my motivation with going out was I had a feature to shoot, which is using the Tamron 90mm 2.8 macro lens. So the other day when it's nice and sunny, I thought I'd take it for a walk and find some stuff to shoot. Now, I'm not an expert on insects and bugs. My partner is, Annie, who's really good at photographing bugs. But I thought, I'll give bugs a go. And you know what? They're really small, these insects about in our world. They're really
probably a good thing, Will, right?
No, it's a right challenge. So I did go hunting around in hedgerows and waiting for stuff to land. It was a bit breezy, so that made life a bit difficult. I did find some butterflies, and that's quite challenging, getting close enough to them with the macro lens. But it's amazing, even though it was I thought it was a calm day, it was nice, bright and sunny and warm, the slightest breath of air waved your subject around in the viewfinder so greatly, because this macro lens can get you down to 1:1.
Yeah. So
this thing's life size.
Yeah.
And it's really quite difficult. So my appreciation of insect photographers, including my dear Annie, it's increased enormously.
What about the lens itself, Will? Because the Tamron 90mm is something that's been around probably almost as long as you have in photography, isn't it?
Thank you very much. Well, the first one came out many years ago. 41 years ago, I think it was the first one.
Well, there you go.
But this is the latest reincarnation. It came out in 2016 when Tamron brought their lens collection up to date. So they've got a Nikon one, a Canon one. I think Sony's on the way. But this has got the latest tech in it. So there's, vibration compensation. it's a real quiet autofocus with the what they call the USD motor, the ultrasonic silent drive. And so this is the very latest lens designed for maximizing the resolution of the latest cameras.
So without giving away too much in terms of the test, is it a thumbs up, or is it a thumbs in the middle?
I think it's very much a thumbs up. I love macro lenses, and this one is a very good one to use. The autofocus, like I say, is really very, very good, and the optical quality is sound too. So when you see the feature, you might not like the pictures, but that's user error rather than lens error. Oh. And like I said, it is a hell of a skill. Insect photographers will go, well, yeah, of course it is. But those who haven't tried it, and maybe you guys haven't, it's worth a go. Just explore the world of the small.
That is why, isn't it? People tend to do these things under far more kind of restricted conditions, a bit like lockdown itself. But you don't go out and poke your lens into a hedgerow, do you? Because everything is going to be really uncontrollable. I mean, I'm sure Annie would love to come on and give us some tips.
Well, I'll have to get on and do that. But it was a bit random, to be fair, to go out for the afternoon, give me a couple of hours to shoot them. And I will go out again and try more. And when it's even calmer, if that's at all possible.
Time of day is quite crucial, because if you've gone out early or sort of right in the middle of the day, that's when your bugs are at their most active. I do actually remember spending a very early summer's morning with a nature photographer called Ross Hoddinott, who took me down to a place where he knew there were going to be loads of butterflies. And this was very, very early in the morning, and there was still they had a load of dew on them, so actually they couldn't go anywhere. So they literally don't move. So if you go out super early in the morning at this time of year, you're probably looking at 6 o'clock, 6:30 when the sun's just coming up. You look closely around, hedgerows and borders, you may well find bugs that actually can't move and are covered in dew, and you can photograph them that way. So maybe just set your alarm clock early, Will.
Not a cat in hell's chance, I'm afraid.
Isn't there there's another practice, isn't there, that I think people kind of, and I don't know how safe one is to kind of do this, but people used to put insects in fridges, didn't they, to slow down their metabolism and make them easier to photograph. Same principle, early morning, cold.
Yeah, exactly the same. I don't know what the moral standpoint is on that, but that's indeed. Certainly I think that is a tried and tested method for sure. But similar to you guys, I did actually get out this time round, and it was kind of quite by chance. As you know, I moved house about 6 or 7 months ago, down to a new area, new county, completely new stomping ground for me. And I was looking or wanting to know really where there was a potential bluebell wood. Now, it's the time of year for bluebells to be in their prime, but quite by chance, I was out walking the dog one morning and met a fellow dog walker, and we chatted at a safe distance for about 2 or 3 minutes, and she happened to drop into conversation that there was a really nice bluebell wood about 100 yards away from where we were chatting. So the next day, I went down there on my requisite dog walk for the day, and she was not wrong. They were absolutely tremendous. Real beautiful sort of carpet of blue. The bluebells were absolutely at their perfect time. I did go at a time when it was overcast, largely because I thought the contrast would be too high in the woodland if it was really sunny. But I got a few pics. I took my X100S with me, got a few pics, obviously didn't hang around too long, didn't have a tripod, but just took a few pics, and very pleasurable it was too.
And how did the Doberman find the bluebells?
Well, actually, do you know what? He's although he's a bit of a boisterous thing, he's only a couple of years old. He's not even a couple of years old. He actually sat down and let me take pictures. It was quite amazing, really. As we have done in the previous 2 podcasts, we've talked briefly about some indoor shooting ideas. We think it's really important at this time to give you some ideas of things you can photograph indoors while the lockdown continues. Obviously, we've been advocating doing some images that you can get out and shoot, but please do make sure that you abide by any rules that are in place along those lines. But Will, why don't you kick us off? You've been up to some fairly interesting things that have involved chopsticks and water and all sorts. So what have you been up to in these last week or so?
Well, just to go back in time a couple of weeks, when we first started this podcast, my thing was doing food dyes in water and patterns and stirring up the water with my fabled chopstick, as it were. And I developed the idea to putting oil in water. So this is sunflower oil dropped on the surface of the water, macro lens from above, a couple of Profoto B10s. I think we mentioned that last time. And I've been making loads and loads of patterns. And I've got into the obsessional stage with oils. So I spent an awful lot of time on these stuff and oils. And it's fun. I mean, I've even ordered some acrylic trays from Amazon, which are about A4 size. So they're dedicated to oil and water. And it's rather fun. Like I said, it's rather obsessional. And I suppose the thing for me is, I mean, both of you are dog owners, and you've got partners, live-in partners too. But for me, of course, I've got no human inhabitant in this house apart from me. And as photographers, I think we're all slightly camera shy. I'm sure that's the case with many photographers. So I thought, what the hell? The only living thing in my house, as in a human being or animal-like, is me. So I'm going to photograph me. So my next idea would be a self-portrait. So again, I've got the flashes out. I'll try some with window light as well. But that's only just something I started thinking about. So more to come on this.
Have you got any plans for it, Will, in terms of, have you got any inspiration, or are you just going to go as the mood? I mean, you're not going to cover yourself in oil and water, are you?
Well, that's a thought and cling film, but that's another story. No, I think the inspiration for me is because I'm a very keen black and white worker, and the self-portrait it wasn't a self-portrait, it's a portrait by somebody of a photographer, but I thought I'd copy it, and it's a picture by Andreas Fenninger, who did this portrait with a guy holding a camera up to his eye. I mean, I'm sure many of our listeners will know exactly who it is, but as you put me on the spot, I can't remember exactly who the photographer is, the subject was. But that's the idea I'm going to go for, which is basically holding a camera up to my eye with a spotlight effect on me, if I can, and do it in black and white. But we'll see. I mean, the things about it, with digital and plenty of time on my hands, I can do all sorts of things. I've even simply, earlier today, I had a courier arrive. Then as I walked towards the front door, I thought, oh, that's an interesting pattern. I could see his face through the pattern glass to the window. I thought, self-portrait idea.
He must have loved coming to your house.
Yeah, just hold it there, mate. I just need to take some pictures. Yeah. So, Kingsley, you ever done any self-portrait stuff before?
I have, and like mostly, well, actually almost entirely for work, because of working on photography technique magazines. Quite often you run these things as tutorials, and I used to work on digital photo, but that was a Photoshop heavy magazine, and so there was quite a lot of stuff where you might, do those kind of things where you position yourself, you lock the camera off, and then you position yourself in various points around the frame. So there's kind of multiple versions of you and things like that. But it's a nice one to think about, and it's sort of perfect kind of technique to do for these sort of times, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And also kind of modern cameras with things like eye detection AF, you're going to find it probably quite a lot easier to point a camera at yourself and use the kind of apertures that you'd want to, I suppose, without having to kind of guess at focus.
I'd see you more as a selfie stick kind of man.
Thanks,
Kingsley.
Thanks very much.
Well, I think I like this talk of self-portrait, so I think we should give ourselves a little challenge. So if Will's got, why don't we all have a go at it? And I think if I've immediately got an idea in my head about something that I could do from just listening to you guys chat. So why don't we, for the next podcast, we will go off and shoot a portrait of ourselves. And then we can discuss the different things that we tried. And maybe what we should do, because we can obviously see each other, we should reveal the results in front of each other on the podcast. So we'll get live image judging.
Just hope no one faints. Yeah.
Yeah, clothes on, chaps. Kingsley, what about you? What's your idea? What can people shoot?
Well, what I was going to look at was actually sort of somewhat inspired by the still life that I'd done in the previous week of the alien toy, because I knew I was going to write something about it and put it on the PN website for a bit more sort of detail and to show off the results. I obviously did a load of behind the scenes pictures as well. And one of those was a flat lay. And it reminded me how a combination of sort of looking at other people's work and probably becoming slightly OCD in my middle age anyway, I've quite often wanted to give flat lay photography a go, and like sometimes you think it's kind of the preserve of 20-something Instagrammers photographing their makeup and stuff, but I think it's definitely something that I'm gonna kind of enjoy doing.
Can you just explain what you mean by flat lay photography?
Basically, it's a top-down view of a series of objects laid out in a sort of an aesthetically pleasing way. But to take it further, what people obviously do is they work in a very particular way on their compositions, and they look for kind of certain color palettes, and they use, nice clean backgrounds. And it's one of those things that you can kind of, typically spend hours on and kind of keep yourself out of the tin goods cupboard, which normally my wife's been sort of pointing a sharp knife at me to sort of stop me going for the tin tomatoes. So I don't know what kind of subject I'm going to use. The one of the toys was a collection of all the things I'd used to make that picture, including the alien's feet that fell off halfway through the technique, which was a fantastic surprise, and the cigars that I used to kind of blow smoke into it. Nice. But I thought probably I'll go and raid the shed and find some old tools, take a picture of some old tools. So let me know when you two are free to do that.
And of course, I mean, photographic gear is often something that photographers will shoot as well. They'll lay their photography gear out, obviously not including the camera that they're going to take the picture with. But yeah, I mean, it's quite a nice way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things that the more you look around, the more kind of similar objects you can find. You're going to kind of come up with those ideas. But also, as I said, you can take objects of particular colors as well, so you're not limited by a particular style. You can work with color and tone and stuff as well. So yeah, I'm sort of looking forward to that. What about you, Rog? What are you going to be up to?
Well, I'm going to taking your idea that you used for your alien thing with smoke. Now, I know that you went out and bought some cigars, but it was just an excuse to go out and buy some cigars, right? I'm going to do some smoke patterns, and I'm going to do that by buying some incense sticks, which will actually make the place smell quite nice anyway. And I've done this before. It's quite cool. It's quite random because you never really know what you're going to get. But the way I did it before, it's very simply lit an incense stick, put the smoke that was coming off it in front of a black background. And then literally with window light and a reflector on the other side. So window on one side, reflector on the other side, and then just snapped away. And the pictures that I got were kind of quite average. But then what I did is I popped them into Photoshop and actually inverted them in curves in Photoshop. So my black background became white, cleaned the background up. And then I used the hue and saturation sliders and found that I could color the smoke up. And it kind of looked like a horse's head shape in the smoke, which I thought was quite nice. So I'm going to have a go at that. It's a really simple technique to do. I've just got to get my hands on some incense sticks, and I'll be away. Moving on, we are going to answer some reader questions. So thank you very much to the people who have got in touch with us. That's the whole point about this podcast, is we want to hear from you guys about anything you're doing photographically, any questions that you may have. And we've got 3 here that we're going to go through. So thank you very much to the people who have sent those in. If you have any questions that you would like to send to us, the easiest way to do that is via email, which is the email address is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. But you can also get in touch with us on social media through Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And the handle on all those 3 is @PhotoNewsPN. So I'm going to dive in. I've given Will and Kingsley a little bit of time to have a think about this, because this is going to spark some discussion, I think. And it's a question that comes from Faye Cherry in Southampton. And she said, I enjoyed your piece in episode 1, so that's a tick. Somebody enjoyed something we said about first and favourite cameras, but which cameras do you think are the best ever made? Let's have 1 SLR and 1 DSLR from each of you. So my favourite SLR is the Contax RTS3. It was very much ahead of its time. It was 1/8,000th of a second fastest shutter speed, for example, 5 frames a second. And it had a very clever vacuum ceramic pressure plate, which effectively sucked the film onto the pressure plate to make sure that it was perfectly flat. when it took its picture. So it was a cracking camera, built like an absolute solid brick thing as well.
Is this something you've owned, or?
It's no, it's actually something that I have tested, which leads me on to quite a nice little anecdote, because I was testing it for practical photography, and we got the opportunity to go and interview a photographer. So bearing in mind I had the camera in for test, I thought, oh, we'll go along and interview this photographer, and I'll go along and take some pictures. So there was two of us. It was in the days when photographic magazines were richly stocked in terms of journalists. So we sent one journalist and me as the photographer to photograph this photographer, who may be somebody that you might have heard of. She's called Annie Leibovitz. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Annie Leibovitz, no? You look her up. She's reasonably well known. Anyway, she had this sort of small exhibition in London. I think she was trying to get her name out there a little bit at that time. And so we went down there, and I started taking some pictures of her with this Contax RTS3. And I couldn't quite get the sort of picture that I wanted. And she said, oh, hang on a minute. I'm a Contax user. Why don't you borrow one of my lenses? So, there and then she basically handed over, I think she gave me an 85mm lens or something like that, because I just had the 50mm standard. And I took some pictures of her, with very shaky hands and feeling slightly overawed by the whole thing. But yeah, so that's my little claim to fame as well, is as I was testing the Contax RTS3, I used it to photograph Annie Leibovitz.
And so this do you think that your experience with this Barry Leibovitz, or whatever his name is, has actually coloured your opinion of the camera, or is it about that sort of recollection that kind of makes you?
It probably is, but it was an absolutely cracking piece of kit. I mean, Contax unfortunately are no longer around, but they made some tremendous cameras. Things like the Contax T2. Is a beautiful piece of kit. I can see Will nodding in appreciation there, and they Contax also used Carl Zeiss lenses on them, so the lens quality was pretty unsurpassed as well if you got a good one. So I mean, yes, I would agree that certain elements of my nomination are tinged with fondness and a memory about photographing Annie Leibovitz, but absolutely it was a cracking camera as well. Moving on quickly before we get to your lesser cameras, which I'll totally disagree with. The DSLR, which I felt was the best ever made, is a very simple one. So whatever you've chosen, it's wrong. EOS 5D Mark II, dead simple. Not the 5D, not the original one. 5D Mark II for the simple reason that it had a film, full HD video capture on it. And for me, there is no other camera that has defined the market that we exist in now for hybrid cameras, photographic cameras that shoot video. So I owned a 5D Mark II. It was a brilliant camera. I actually sold it about 2 years ago, which I really wish I hadn't. But yeah, simple as that. 5D Mark II for the simple reason that it has completely changed the world that we live in now.
I remember the release of that, and it was indeed a very nice camera. I mean, all the buttons are in the wrong places, but
as a Nikon user, you're going to say that, of course. So Kingsley, given that you're a Nikon user, no doubt you're just going to nominate a load of Nikons, aren't you?
Well, you've guessed right there. So in terms of I'm sort of going to open it up a little bit. With the SLR, I've gone for the original Nikon F. Not because I think it's the best SLR ever made, because obviously it was superseded and everything.
Well,
but
that's the Contax RTS3. That's the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with its famous usership. But it's certainly the camera that changed photography in a huge number of ways. Built in 1959, I think, and then until 1974, which is the year I was born, interestingly enough. So they basically, what happened was they decided let's mark it by kind of shutting off this particular camera production. But it's like what it did was it kind of brought in the SLR age. It built on some of the successes of Nikon's rangefinder cameras, and it added the mirror box, the pentaprism, the kind of the contact with the lens, and most importantly the F mount, which survives to this day. And so like if you do a Marty McFly and you travel through time, if you've got an F mount lens from your Nikon DSLR with you, you can slap it on a Nikon F and shoot away. And most importantly, it's the camera that saved Don McCullin's life, isn't it? Remember this story? He was
Vaguely,
yes. Yeah. Well, he was it stopped a bullet basically. 1968. Someone shot at him with a AK-47 and it stopped the bullet. So yeah, and obviously I remember that well in 1968.
That's the year I was born.
Well, there you go. This is so. Will, anything to add about
what year were you born in, Will?
Thanks a lot. Well, look, you both offer interesting opinions, and just the McCullin thing, just to finish with that. They had the camera on show at his exhibition of pictures last year. It was, so that was interesting.
So yeah, I didn't see that, but I would have loved to have seen that actual camera. I think would have been an amazing thing to see. I don't own a Nikon F. I would like to, and I may get around to buying one at some stage. But the camera that I do own, which I think is the best digital SLR ever, and genuinely do think it's the best digital SLR ever, is the D850, which is the kind of the culmination of a huge number of technologies, which I think I said on the first podcast actually that, you know, I picked out when we were talking about our favorite cameras, I picked out the D700 because just of the way it kind of made me feel, and it was a big step up for me at that point. But the D850 is the best DSLR ever made, I think. Big, huge sensor, but also kind of adaptable because you can shoot in sort of medium and small RAW if you don't want all the resolution. Fantastic handling, great weather sealing.
I think all the buttons are in the wrong place, though. No?
You can get a special version. You can get them rearranged. Nikon will do that for you. They're nice like that. But this is kind of like, all these other features like, modern things like focus stacking, like silent photography, so that if you're doing time-lapse stuff or, lots of exposures, you don't have to kind of keep, the actual mechanical shutter going. And the buttons light up in the dark, which is brilliant.
Amazing. Will, come on. You're bound to be contrite and come up with something else. So what have you picked?
Well, look, guys, you picked some really milestone products. And just to carry on the Nikon loving, just very briefly, my chosen DSLR is one that Kingsley's already mentioned, which is the D700. And I've picked it only because it was a camera that made me change camera systems. And I think we all know what a commitment a camera system is. So to change systems after years of being into one to Nikon with a D700 shows how important that camera was. I tested it for a magazine, which is why I got to try it early doors, and I just got to love its noise performance. And I used it hard over maybe 4 or 5 years. I mean, look, I remember they said the camera was built for 150,000 shutter actuations, but I must have done 3 or 4 times that, and in really tough conditions as well. Lots of salt, lots of cold, lots of dust, and the thing just carried on and on and on. And to be fair, I did sell it. I think I did about nearly 600,000 actuations when I sold it. Didn't get much for it. All the rubber was peeling away from it.
That's not the one I bought, is it?
But good luck to them.
Did it also only have one shutter speed by the end of that 600,000? It just sort of roughly gave you about a 30th of a second, no matter what you set on the dial.
I think I was lucky it was still working. Anyway, for me, that was a defining camera. And my other defining camera I've picked, it's not a SLR, it is a rangefinder camera. Now, I've always been a bit of a fan of Leica. So my favorite Leica is the Leica MP. And that's not to be confused with the current camera MP, which is M-P. But this is the original MP, which came out in 2003. And I've got one in my hand. So look,
we can see it.
This is an actual treat, an audible treat. Listen to this.
Go on.
Hear that?
Yeah.
That is the sound of quality engineering. So the MP was mechanical in that, if the battery went, I mean, there was a camera meter in it, but if the battery went, you can carry on shooting with it. It's built like a tank, but not in a horrible way. It's just silky smooth. It's beautiful to use. Obviously, it uses Leica lenses. I've got a couple of lenses with it. And so I still use it. And that's my favorite ever camera in that respect. And it's a film rangefinder as opposed to an SLR. So I went off piece very slightly, Rog, on your brief.
No surprise, Will. No surprise. Well, that fantastic question, Faye. Thank you very much for that. We hope we've answered that. Obviously, we'd love to hear from other people what they think of our choices, and in fact what you think are the best SLRs and DSLRs ever made. So let's move on. This is probably a little bit quicker. Adam Connor from London has said, during these lockdown times, can we recommend any good photo books, films or documentaries? Kingsley, can you?
I'm going to try. Obviously we had a little bit of prior notice of the questions. And what it made me think of was a program that I watched probably sort of 30 years ago, and it was quite old then, but I watched it as part of my my studies, called Ways of Seeing, which was originally, I think, on BBC Two. It was broadcast in 1972, which is 2 years before I was born, and it's got for starters, it's brilliant. It's got the John Berger who does it, is amazing amazing critic and expert on art and photography and all sorts of visual media. Is wearing a brilliant shirt in it, and he sort of makes mention of, like, you know, there's one point the program is all about context, about how you view images in different contexts and stuff like that. I mean, it's about more than that, but at one point they cut between you look at a painting and then it cuts to what he says is on one of the other two channels, and it changes how you perceive this image. It's very, very clever stuff, but it's one to get you thinking. There are 4 parts. I think the last part is about color photography. There's a book too, if you can manage to get through that. It's a little bit of a tough going in places, but
I can certainly agree with that. It's very tough.
I mean, it's a thinking one, really. It's and it kind of makes you think about the way that you read images.
So what about you, Will? Something maybe slightly lighter, or are you going pretty hardcore as well?
Well, there's a mix, and just to go back to our friend Don McCullin, who was mentioned earlier, if you get the chance, and to be fair, I don't know if it's still on there, but on the BBC iPlayer, there is a documentary featuring Don McCullin. It's called Looking for England on BBC 4. And this is a recent documentary, and that's really fascinating because he revisited some locations he shot back when he started becoming a noteworthy photographer. Now, in terms of film, I picked out 4 films to look at, so if you get the chance to check them out, go for it. The Eyes of Laura Mars, starring Faye Dunaway, that was fantastic. Blow Up, which is a 1966 film, which is featuring David Hemmings, and it was first English language film by the famous Italian director Antonioni. So Blow Up's worth watching. But my two favourite films involved with photographers, and certainly worth looking for: Salvador, 1986, directed by Oliver Stone, starring James Woods. Cracking film. Really tense ending, but my favourite film, and the one which I know is on Sky Cinema because I watched it the other day, and that's a film called Rear Window, which is a 1954 classic by Hitchcock. Stars Jimmy Stewart, James Stewart, and Grace Kelly, and basically it's about this photographer who is a photojournalist. He's broken his leg, and he spent the summer looking out of his window of his apartment, and I don't want to spoil the plot, obviously, but he thinks he witnesses a murder. And Grace Kelly is his girlfriend, and she's obviously gorgeous. And it's amazing. She just comes in from the 1954 equivalent of Sainsbury's. She comes in this ball gown. Every time she turns up at his flat, she's in a gorgeous ball gown. But it's a tremendous film. So if you want to enjoy a film with photographic interest and a bit of, and it's not too heavy, and it's light-hearted, but it's also lovely and well shot. Some great characters. Try Rear Window by Hitchcock.
My recommendation, which is a little bit more up to date from you chaps languishing in the 1970s or 50s,
even earlier,
which is something that is called Finding Vivian Mayer, which is a fantastic documentary based around, I don't know how much you guys know about Vivian Mayer, but basically she wasn't really known until she died, and a chap called John Maloof uncovered some of her negatives, and he bought them, and it turns out that there are over 100,000 photographs, negatives, films that she captured when she was a nanny. She died, I think, in 2009, and it's just this most amazing story about how this guy unearthed these pictures in the first place, and also the sort of story that he subsequently uncovered about about Vivian Maier and the way she used to work and who she was as a person. And it's just absolutely tremendous. It's on Netflix, but an absolute must see.
So I thought you was that story going to end with the fact that you've met her while she was nannying for Don McCullin or something like that.
I have been to New York, Kingsley, but I've not met her. So no, I no, it wasn't going to end like that. The way it was going to end, though, is that one thing that we haven't actually mentioned there is books. And after a little, I'm surprised, Will, given that your previous form on this podcast is to plug everything that you do, that you haven't recommended that Adam might like to indulge in a copy of the Bronica Manual, which I believe that you produced in the late 1980s. Now, I noticed I went on Amazon earlier and discovered that that's actually available for the princely sum of £26.
Wow.
You got to pay 26 quid to get it.
20 quid if it's signed, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I also noticed, Will, black and white camera craft. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I did a series of books called Camera Craft, black and white landscapes, I think portraits. There's several of them.
Well,
and the Bronica Manual is a classic instruction manual of its type. If anybody does have a Bronica and wants the ultimate instruction manual, that is certainly a book well worth 26 quid.
If £26 is a little too salty for you, I can say that you can get a non-signed copy of black and white camera craft for 71 pence on Amazon.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the question, Adam. We've got one more, which, Kingsley, you're going to be in the spotlight a little bit here, because a chap called Paul Moore from Hull has got in touch and said, in the first podcast, Kingsley mentioned that higher resolution cameras can make images look less sharp. Is he mad? Can you explain? Well, yes, he is. But I'm sure he is about to explain why he said that. Go on, Kingsley. The floor's yours.
I was going to say it's up to you two to judge whether I'm mad or not, but this is kind of, and I'm sure Will be able to pitch on this as well. But it's to do with a number of photo sites on the sensor and how they're used to record light. And the principle basically is that the fewer photo sites you've got, the sharper the image is going to look if the camera is moving. So when you have things like camera shake, where the camera moves a little bit as you take a picture, if sort of, say you've got a tree branch and it's moving across 3 pixels, it's going to look less sharp than if it's moving across 1 pixel as the light's sort of hitting the sensor. So what it is kind of basically lower resolution. It kind of condenses the sharpness in a completely unscientific way. And this is why cameras like the D850 that me and Will have both got have these modes like exposure delay and sort of slightly kind of dampened mirrors to sort of stop this vibration.
Another thing about high resolution cameras is that they can suffer more from poor noise performance. So when you start going into the higher ISOs, because of the tight structures of these sensors where lots and lots of pixels are crammed in, when you start going up the high ISO scales, you can get more noise, more digital noise. That said, cameras like the 850 and ones by Canon and Sony, noise is actually very well controlled. But there is an issue with noise the higher you go, potentially, as well as camera shake.
I was just going to add to the end of that sort of a simple experiment you can do to see this kind of in action is just to take like an original image and then resize it down to a smaller size. And if you view them together, you'll notice, at the same kind of size on your screen, you'll notice that one looks sharper than the other because of the way that you're kind of throwing away some of the pixels. Does that make sense? Or am I still mad?
No, I think that makes sense. And so I hope, Paul, that makes sense to you as well, and that we've actually answered your question there. If not, it's Kingsley Singleton at bright-publishing.com for further information. Thank you for those questions. Very, very useful, very interesting. So please do send your questions in. As I said at the start of this section, it's podcast@photographynews.co.uk. Just a couple of other plugs. Obviously, the website, photographynews.co.uk, is constantly being updated with news, and this is where the podcasts live, as well as the articles that myself, Kingsley, and Will are producing to support the content that we're producing for the podcast. So go over and have a look at that. If you are yet to subscribe to getting the magazine digitally, then please go to getpn.co.uk. Basically, we will then deliver the magazine digitally to your inbox every month whenever it comes out. And if you sign up between now and the 31st of May, you'll be put into the hat. It's quite a large hat, admittedly, but you'll be put into the hat to potentially win an Olympus TG6 camera. And also mentioned as well our social media streams, which we're at Photo News PN on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So, gentlemen, I think we've probably run our course, but of course, there's one last thing that we have to finish on, which is Will's Word of Wisdom, www. Will's Word of Wisdom. So come on, Will, leave us with a little gem for everybody until we meet again in a fortnight's time.
Well, it's a simple thing, and it stems from the lockdown, because I've been clearing out my back bedroom, and I've moved houses at various times in the last few years, and I've got lots and lots of boxes and lots and lots of boxes of books. So my tip from the top until the next time we meet is to just go through some books and get inspired. I mean, I've got collections of photographs by a lot of the well-known photographers. I mean, Sebastião Salgado, in my view, the world's best current living photojournalist. I've got books by Bill Brandt. I've got books by Irving Penn, Helmut Newton, Sarah Moon, all sorts of people. And during my clear up, because I actually want to get rid of some of these books because I'm trying to live a bit lighter. I want to get rid of some of these books, but I've been going through a lot and just being totally inspired. So even though these pictures, I can't do because I can't get out, or I don't live in the right time and all that sort of thing, but they're so inspiring. And some ideas will come of it, and no doubt some project ideas will come from it. So, yeah, my tip: get yourself inspired.
Are a couple of those boxes full of copies of black and white camera craft that you're trying to knock out on Amazon for 71 pence? Will?
Yeah, I'm gonna get them on there because I need a few quid as well. On
okay, fantastic.
Manuals as well. If they're going for 26 quid, I'll try and move a few of those.
Signed for 20 quid though, remember that. Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time, Will. Thank you very much for your time, Kingsley. That brings us to the end of another PM podcast. Please let us know what you think. Please stay in touch, and please stay safe, whatever you're doing, out and about, or maybe just in. Okay, we'll speak to you again in a couple of weeks. Cheers now.
Shouldn't be this difficult, should it?
No, it shouldn't.
That was Beady. Did you hear that? That was Beady. That's her shouting for her dinner.